Please welcome to the stage Veronica Juarez, Vice President Social Enterprise Lyft, Ronale Serrate Vajani, Chief Marketing Officer, Los Angeles Rams, Maria Ranning Fisher-Jones, Corporate Counsel, Google, and moderator Ebony Beckwith, Chief Philanthropy Officer, Salesforce.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Really excited to see you. What a great last session. So this session is all about how we use our position and our platform to create change and create a sense of community. So you can see who all of our speakers are, but I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves and why that sense of community is so important. We'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's amazing to be here with you. My sense of community really started with my family. I grew up in a family in Houston, Texas, and so many members of my family were so committed to political activism and community involvement. And I learned at a very early age that we really believed that being involved in our community was a vehicle for change and progress. So now I'm extremely grateful to work at a company that shares those same values and that is committed to progress and supporting vulnerable communities across our country.
Great. Rosalie?
So I'm Filipino-American. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My parents immigrated here. My mom immigrated here with $50 in her pocket. And I always hold that close and near and dear to my heart because that is the perspective I bring to the table in our communities. And community means so many different things. But ultimately, for me, community is all about belonging and acceptance and being able to be who you are no matter who you are. And in doing so, being able to be around others where you can be vulnerable, you can make mistakes, and you can learn and still be okay. And so, in that sense, community is so important because that's where we can grow in the best way possible.
And Maria.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a good question. I'm from the Blackfeet Indian Reservation in Montana. It's very remote. It's up near the Canadian border. And so, for me, community is family. And in my small tribe, well, it's actually a fairly good-sized tribe, but small when you think about other parts of the world, your family was your community because literally half of the town is related to you. And so when I moved, I didn't have family. I didn't have community. I moved here for school, and then I ended up working here. And so being so far away from home, the people in my community became my family.
So part of my community is the backstage and getting my makeup done. It's really fun. I wish we could have cameras in the green room and in the makeup rooms because we have so many great conversations. Tell us about just a little bit about your family restaurant and what you were telling me about your aunt. I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Sure. So my family, we own an infamous taqueria in Houston called Via Arcos. It was founded by my dad's aunt, Velia. And while I was growing up, my dad's cousin, Yolanda Black Navarro, ran the restaurant. And it was always a hotbed in the community for people to come in and talk and exchange ideas and talk about politics. And she was super involved. She was on the Metro board. She ran for city council. And she really taught me. I would go in for a taco, and she would make me sit down, and she'd come out behind the counter, and we'd have these mentoring sessions, essentially. She was really my first mentor growing up and encouraging me to continue to be involved. And I'll just say this, when she passed away a couple of years ago from cancer, the Houston Chronicle wrote something about her in the Chronicle, and it said, thumbs up for Yolanda Black Navarro, who was a community activist and pounded the editorial table harder for poor people, immigrants, and children. And getting emotional. Houston named a huge county park after her and renamed a middle school in the neighborhood after her. So I really take her legacy and my family's commitment to community very seriously.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing with all of us. Now, Maria, you talked a little bit about the reservation, and I know growing up there was a 69% unemployment rate. Tell us about how that really influenced you and kind of what you do and your passion for giving back. And maybe a little bit about your role now.
Oh, sure.
I added something in there for you.
Two roles. During my daytime job is I'm an attorney for Google, where I support the cloud M&A activity. And in all of my spare time outside of that, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TP Mocks, which handcrafts Native American children's moccasins. We have a very clear mission. It's to employ Native Americans on remote reservations, like mine, which has a 69% unemployment rate, and then also to give a portion of those profits back to the community. So we partner with local organizations to provide resources so that, in the dead of winter, when it's literally 25, 30 below, we take things for granted. Like, I can go buy a jacket at any given moment. I can buy diapers for my children, but that's a luxury. And so now I'm getting emotional about it, thinking about just reflecting on my own upbringing. But, the ability to do that is what I do at night and on the weekends, and I, live, breathe, and sort of sleep that aspect of my life now.
I'm going to ask this question to all of you, but Ronali, I'm going to start with you. What's it like leading at the top as a woman, especially in your industry? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the Los Angeles Rams. And the NFL is probably known as a male-dominated industry. And so it's been really interesting in the sense of I didn't really think about my background quite as much as I have coming into the role. And part of that has been a function of being on panels like this and other women of color coming up to me, other Asian American women coming up to me and saying, "Thank you, I don't see people like you." And so growing up and building your career, it's almost like you have to put that on the back burner because there are certain tacit norms that exist in corporate America. And so you adapt to certain styles in order to succeed in certain ways, in certain communities, in certain cultures. And so you almost forget sometimes that you don't always look the same as everybody else. But when other people come up to me and make that known, not in a bad way, but in a good way, it's almost become a responsibility and a privilege to be able to own the identity that I have and to proudly share it. Whereas before I would want to kind of stay to the side or stay behind. Now I want to be out there, not for me, but for all those that are coming up so that they can see others like them.
Maria, how about you? What's it like leading at the top, being a woman of color, and then developing that next generation of leaders?
Yeah, similar experience. It's I like people know it's the imposter syndrome. Fake it until you make it, and often still to this day, I may be the only woman in the room. I may be the only person of color in the room, and I advise clients on big issues that impact a lot of the big tech companies in the area. But also as a CEO of a company, when I walk into the room, people often say, "Oh, well, where's the CEO?" And that's always a unique experience. And I had the same experience where at times it feels like a burden, but at this point it's now become a privilege because there aren't a lot of people out there that look like me or have the same experiences that I do. And so I find it a privilege to say, okay, put on your big girl pants today and go out there and face that adversity so that it's not as difficult for the next person that looks like you.
Sure. I don't need to tell you all what it's like to feel like the only one of X in the room. You know that. I think what crystallized for me as a realization as I started to take on more responsibility was really, truly understanding what I was committed to and then taking actions every day inside of that commitment. And no matter what kind of challenges or breakdowns come my way, as long as I stay committed to what I'm committed to, it becomes that much easier to act. In my role, I am committed to providing vulnerable communities, low-income people, people without access, to rides that will change their life so that they have access to after-school programs, to education, to jobs, to medical appointments, and the list goes on. So when I get stuck, I just think, like, how many hundreds of thousands, how many millions of people do not have the opportunity to be in this room right now with these people with the hope of making a difference? And then I take that action on behalf of all those people who don't have the opportunity that you and me have. And that doesn't mean that I still don't encounter as many challenges and breakdowns as you all do on a daily basis. I do, for sure. But I know that I'm in a privileged place, and so I'm able to stay committed to that agreement with myself.
I'm going to switch gears for a little bit. So I think of myself as the CEO of Ebony Inc.,
Yeah.
and I have a board of directors. They are my mentors and advisors, just like as a company, if you were a CEO of a company, you'd have a CFO, so I have a financial advisor, I have a chief marketing officer for my brand and my look, and I have all these different, advisors, right? So Veronica, I know, you've spoken about this in recent interviews. Tell me about the value of mentoring and how your experience with both mentoring and being mentored.
Sure. I think the most important factor or advice that I could offer is to approach mentoring or being a mentee with intentionality. So what is it that you're really hoping to learn from that person? The worst email or LinkedIn message I can receive is, "I'd love to talk to you and pick your brain." That's just the worst. Like, about what? What do you want to learn? What do you want to talk about? What skills do you want to develop? How are you looking to really advance your career? And can I help you with that specific action? The other piece I would say is that I have my best mentors, and I know people have different opinions about this, but my really best mentors have always been my managers. And I've enrolled them in being a mentor and saying, "Hey, I really admire your work in these areas. Would you be willing to mentor me in these areas? Can we work on a promotion for me over the next year, over the next 2 years? And what would that look like?" And it's because of those conversations and that transparency and that vulnerability about what I really admire about their work and how I'm looking to learn that I think my career has been able to advance in a way that now it's really, truly an authentic expression of who I am and what I care about.
Ronald, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on mentoring in general.
I think it's so incredibly important. Growing up, I didn't know how to find mentors, particularly because I couldn't find anyone that looked like me. And so what I ended up doing was trying to find a connection. And I always found that when it was a forced mentorship, it was awkward, it didn't work out, you just didn't get as much out of it. And the best ones were the ones where there was a specific reason for the mentorship, right? And I think you had mentioned something very similar. But having a sense of purpose for why you guys are connected is really important, because it has to go both ways, right? So I've had mentors and I've mentored others, and the best ones are you have that connection where you can be vulnerable. And I think that's the biggest thing, because the biggest learning comes in the vulnerability. But oftentimes, we're trying to do a certain thing, achieve a certain thing, and so that vulnerability can't be exposed because you don't want it exposed because you're trying to present yourself a certain way. But the reality is we all have an opportunity to grow in one way or another. But the only way to really break through that and to do it in a meaningful and a quick way is to be exposed. And so to have that trusting relationship where you can be honest with one another and then be intently open to the feedback that may hurt and that may make you feel small, but knowing that the intention is there to grow you is really worth more than anything, because that's where you have the opportunity to take yourself to the next level.
So we have you ladies, Lyft, Rams, Google, some pretty powerful and really big jobs, and you have other roles in your life, mother, wife, friend, whatever it may be. Are you still continuing to be mentored in all of your roles? I know you have a lot of hats that we were talking about in the green room.
Absolutely. I think, to be mentored is to grow in some area. And one thing I'd like to point out for folks is you don't always have to be mentored by somebody that looks like you. Sometimes mentorship comes in forms that you would have never expected. I have a perfect example. I came from a big law firm, hundreds of associates, one of the few minority associates in the entire law firm. And there was always this old white guy who would just always say hi to me. And I was like, me? Because it wasn't something I expected. And he just sort of kept at it, and on occasion would invite me to lunch. And then there were a couple of times he'd say, hey, I have a couple of pitches. I'd like to get your eyes on this. And I was reluctant at first because I thought, how can I relate to this guy? Why is he interested in talking to me? And he's now a friend, and he'll be a mentor until the day I die. And a few days ago, I received a message from him, and it was, hey, Maria, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And I responded and gave him an update, and sometimes I'm thinking, oh, does he need something? And he just said, great, I just wanted to check in.
Staying on you for a minute, so you came to Google by way of Oracle?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. Tell me how you got interested and drawn into the tech industry.
Default. I wish I had some amazing story where I was driven to create some app.
We all.
I was in graduate school, and a good friend of mine, who's now one of my best friends, or actually she became a good friend of mine through graduate school, she had a book one day, and I said, what are you looking at? And she says, oh, I'm studying for the LSATs. And I'm like, what is the LSAT? She says, well, it's the test you need to take to get into law school. And I thought, well, maybe I want to go to law school, right? Because that sounds like a really good idea. And so at the time, I couldn't afford the courses. And so I just went when there were brick and mortar Barnes and Nobles. I don't know if they have those anymore. I would go to the coffee shop in Berkeley, and I would just sit there for hours, and I would study for these tests. And so at some point, I got into law school, and I'm like, now what? And so I show up, nobody in my family's a lawyer, I don't know lawyers, and people around me, parents are lawyers, parents are judges, and I had no idea what I was gonna do. And people, well, what kind of law are you interested in? And I heard somebody say corporate law, and I thought, well, that sounds like corporations. I am interested in corporate law. And so I had no idea what that was. And so I started looking it up, and I'm like, well, it's kind of like corporations. You do things within corporations, because I really had no idea. And so the interesting thing about law school is that in your first year, you have to, you interview for positions that you probably are going to take the job 2 years from then. And so you're supposed to know exactly what you're interested in. So I just rode that train to the very end, right? And so I'm very passionate about it. I was just naming corporations. And somebody actually hired me for that position,
Wow.
believe it or not. And that sort of segued into tech, which happens to be corporations. Salesforce people happen to be corporations, and now obviously I have a very specific sector that I focus on. But I just sort of happened to fall into it. So I wish I had some amazing story.
That is an amazing story.
I wanted to develop an app, but that's how it happened.
I think that's about as good as it gets. You just fall into being a lawyer. That's not my story. Never probably going to be my story. It makes it sound very simple. I opened a book. Okay. That's why you're on this panel. All right, so Veronica, so all of us are familiar with Lyft. We're talking a little bit before about the transportation gap. Tell us a little bit about what that is and why you're the work you're doing around that.
Sure.
Don't tell me you opened up a book and...
No. No, but I worked in politics almost 10 years before Lyft, and I had never worked at a tech company. I'd never worked at a private company before. But I did this search online, and this job description for Lyft spoke to me, and it said, be a pioneer and build a new deal and work on this big problem. And I thought, this sounds amazing, but what is Lyft? This was 6 years ago. And so when I looked it up, I realized, wow, okay, if we can deliver on this mission, then we will actually create access for transportation for people who need it the most. And that is really what drew me to the company. So now I'm building our business for nonprofits and social services. So I'm committed to connecting those vulnerable communities with rides that other people pay for, either a nonprofit or a government agency, and now we're speaking to foundations and institutions. Because we know if you look at many social equity issues and challenges, we know that one of the biggest issues related to all of those issues is access to transportation.
Tell us about Wheels for All.
Sure. Wheels for All is one of our commitments to live out this value. We went public in March of this year, and we doubled down on our commitment to communities. And one of those commitments is that we will donate either $50 million or 1% of our profits to communities in which we operate. And one of those pillars is for free and discounted transportation. To give you an example of a program that we run, we are really interested in supporting immigrants. Many of our drivers, our employees, our riders are immigrants. And we believe that when their values are threatened, our values are threatened. So we have partnered with a number of different immigration organizations to donate free and discounted transportation. And what we have learned is that in doing so, that ride can mean the difference between someone being deported or not, because that ride will mean the difference between them getting to their hearings or not. So now in the app, if you go onto the left side of the app in the menu, you can choose one of those organizations called Raíces through our Roundup and Donate program. And those funds from your donations will support transportation for immigrants.
That's great. So Ronali, you, many people may not know this, but you have a history of marketing, being like CMO for some very iconic brands. So the brands being one, Hershey, anybody heard of Hershey's? Being another. How do you appeal to different audiences? How do you be inclusive and include the community around you?
It's interesting. So I'm a brand builder at heart. I love building brands, and the reason I love that is I love building those emotional connections, right, for whatever that is. Prior to football, it was chocolate and candy. But it's really just about connecting from a value system, right? What is it about the organization that you represent, the product that you represent? What are the values behind that? And then what are the values of the different target segments that you're looking at? And how do you connect in an authentic way? There's many different ways to market, as you all know, but for me, it's about that authenticity. And it's about connecting in ways that are actually meaningful and starting there as the foundation. So at the Rams, community is such a big part of who we are, because in coming back to Los Angeles, this is our home. And just like anybody else, your home, your family, you invest in them. You grow with them, you help build them, and you connect with them on a value level. And so we kind of started from that sense. And when I look at brand building, I look at it from the most authentic and ground up sense, and then work from there. Because I think that's the way where you build a long time and real connection. And that's where brands become meaningful to you.
Our last question, this is really amazing. Going back to where we started, purpose and community building and using your position to lift up. What words of advice do you have for others who are inspired to do more of that?
I would say, one, really understand what your values are and what you're committed to. In what way are you uniquely positioned to change the world? And you all are. And you all have access to services and communities and platforms and people. I mean, you're here, so that's amazing. And then I would say to really stay inside of that commitment. And every day it will get easier, and you will be astounded by the results that you are able to produce.
Thank you, Veronica. Ronali?
In a similar vein, one thing I really stay committed to is this idea of owning your authenticity. You were hired for a reason. You're sitting at the table for a reason. You bring with you your unique individual perspectives. And the worst thing that can happen is to not share that. Because what uniquely makes you you is why you're there. You have something to bring, and that stems from the multitude of experiences that have shaped you and that have helped you be who you are. And I think sometimes in this crazy world, we are fighting to fit in, or we're fighting to be something that we're aspiring to be, and yet we forget that the best part of us is us. And so making sure that that shows up and shows out in a meaningful way is really, really important.
Love that. And Maria?
Get up every morning and bring your whole self to work. You can't create change, the change that you want, if you're not true to who you are. I say, I've done this 1,000 times, and I'm still learning from it. Don't go home and lie in bed and think, if only I had said this, if only I had done that. Because when you bring your whole self to work, you don't go to sleep with those regrets.
Please help me thank this powerhouse panel. Thank you, ladies. Great job.